He was a millionaire at the top of his game, powerful, respected, untouchable. Yet, behind the polished walls of his empire, his world was collapsing. Deals worth hundreds of millions slipped through his hands, and the future of his company was hanging by a thread. No one could explain why. No one, except the person no one ever noticed. She was invisible to everyone. Dismissed, overlooked, treated as if she didn't belong. But what she carried inside would shatter the lies, expose the betrayal, and turn the entire story upside down. The question is, how could the most powerful man in the room be saved by the one everyone ignored? Ethan Cole was the image of success, a 36-year-old self-made millionaire who had built his empire from nothing. His name carried weight in boardrooms, his company's logo was stamped on skyscrapers, and people spoke of his achievements with admiration. But what most didn't see was the pressure tightening around him. For months, contract after contract had slipped through his fingers, and now a staggering $250 million deal had just collapsed. Inside the polished conference room, 12 of his best-paid executives sat frozen in silence, unable to explain why the company was bleeding. The empire Ethan had fought so hard to build was crumbling, and no one seemed to have answers. Just outside that room, at a plain desk in the reception area, sat Naomi Carter. She was 33, quiet, overlooked, and to most people, forgettable. She kept her head down, filing documents, answering phones, blending into the background. To them, she was just the help. But what no one realized was that Naomi carried something far greater than the people in suits could ever imagine. And soon, when the walls of Cole Enterprises threatened to collapse entirely, the truth she had been holding would change everything. The pressure inside Cole Enterprises reached its breaking point the day Victor Harrington, Ethan's ruthless rival, made his move. A phone call came through, an offer to buy Ethan's empire for a humiliating fraction of its worth. In the conference room, the once confident millionaire sat stunned, his voice shaking with disbelief. His empire, once valued at nearly $2 billion, was being reduced to scraps. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, but not one had the courage or the insight to speak. And just beyond that door sat Naomi Carter. For 5 years, she had watched, silent and invisible, as men in suits made decisions that crumbled around them. She had seen the arrogance, the waste, the carelessness. But more painfully, she had felt the sting of invisibility. Dismissed as nothing more than the maid of the office, useful only for pouring coffee, answering phones, and tidying up. Few even bothered to remember her name. Yet Naomi knew the truth. She had earned her degree from Stanford summa cum laude. But every interview, every boardroom she had stepped into after graduation ended the same way. Rejection. Not because of her qualifications, but because of who she was. A black woman in spaces dominated by men who didn't see her as an equal. The words, "not a cultural fit," had followed her from one rejection to the next until desperation forced her into a job far beneath her skill. Now, as Ethan's empire teetered on collapse, Naomi carried the knowledge that could change everything. She had studied every report, every contract, every mistake. And she had noticed what the executives had missed. Harrington wasn't just lucky, he was informed. Every bid Cole Enterprises submitted seemed to fall directly into Harrington's hands, as if someone on the inside was feeding him their secrets. Her heart pounded as she weighed her decision. Speaking up could end her career. She knew how people like her were treated. The dismissals, the smirks, the subtle ways her voice was silenced. But staying quiet would mean watching a man, flawed but hardworking, lose everything he had built to corruption. So she stood. With trembling hands, she walked toward the heavy doors of the boardroom, a space she had never been invited into. When she knocked, 12 heads turned in irritation, as if an outsider had interrupted sacred ground. Ethan's eyes narrowed in surprise, but he allowed her in. What happened next left the room in stunned silence. Naomi revealed that the very printing company trusted with their proposals was owned by Harrington's brother. Confidential bids were leaking straight into enemy hands. Gasps filled the room, but Naomi wasn't finished. She pointed out the deeper issue, Cole's reliance on overpriced materials, while Harrington cleverly used cheaper alternatives that passed every standard test. The evidence was undeniable, the logic irrefutable. For the first time, Ethan truly saw her. Not as a maid, not as background noise, but as the person holding the answers his entire empire depended on. Yet Naomi knew this was only the beginning. What she had uncovered hinted at something darker. Betrayal from within, and a conspiracy far more dangerous than anyone in that room imagined. And she was the only one willing to confront it. The walls of Cole Enterprises shook with betrayal when Naomi uncovered the final piece of the puzzle. Hidden deep in the files, buried beneath layers of data, she found proof that one of Ethan's own executives had been feeding Harrington every secret. The betrayal wasn't just random, it was deliberate, bought with blood money. Deposits of $50,000, over and over, funneled into one man's account. Mark Patterson, a senior executive, a man Ethan had trusted for years. When Naomi presented the evidence, the room erupted. Patterson's face turned pale, then red with rage. He denied everything, slamming his fist on the table, his voice booming louder than hers. But no matter how loud he grew, the truth screamed louder. Every document, every transfer, every piece of data pointed to him. For years, Naomi had been ignored, dismissed, treated as invisible. Now, as she stood in that room full of men who once looked through her, every eye was locked on her. She wasn't background anymore. She was the storm tearing through their false security. But what made this moment burn deeper was the way some of them looked at her. Not with gratitude, not with respect, but with doubt. Even in the face of undeniable evidence, her skin, her position, her history as just the maid made them hesitate. Would they believe her, or would they protect one of their own? The tension cracked when Ethan called the FBI. Patterson's mask shattered. The man who had once towered with authority now crumbled under the weight of his lies. The agents hauled him out in handcuffs, but the damage was already done. The empire had been betrayed from within, nearly destroyed by the very people meant to protect it. And in the middle of it all stood Naomi Carter, the woman no one had ever seen, holding the truth that had saved it all. But Harrington wasn't finished. His empire was still standing. His arrogance is still unbroken. And Naomi knew. The real battle was only just beginning. When Victor Harrington walked into Cole Enterprises, he expected victory. He expected to buy his rival's empire for pennies, to gloat as Ethan Cole bowed in defeat. But instead, he was met with Naomi Carter. Calm, steady, and prepared, she laid out every piece of evidence. Bank transfers, hacked records, and recordings of his arrogance. And in that moment, the man who thought himself untouchable realized the trap had been set. Within hours, the FBI stormed in. Harrington's empire collapsed, his reputation destroyed, his name forever stained with betrayal. But for Naomi, this was more than just justice against one corrupt businessman. This was about visibility. For 5 long years, she had been invisible, dismissed because of her race, her gender, her position. What they failed to see was her brilliance, her resilience, her strength. And when the dust settled, Ethan Cole did something no one expected. He handed her the title of executive vice president, with real authority and a share of the profits. The woman once mocked as the maid became the very person steering the company toward its greatest success. Yet the story doesn't end in a boardroom. Naomi's rise is a reflection of countless real stories. Talented black women and men overlooked, rejected, or silenced, not because of ability, but because of prejudice. How many voices are still ignored? How many Naomis are still sitting in the background, holding solutions the world refuses to see? Her story forces us to confront a truth. Racism doesn't always appear as open hate. Sometimes it hides in boardrooms, in hiring decisions, in subtle dismissals that rob people of opportunities they deserve. Naomi's journey is proof that being underestimated can be turned into strength. But the question remains, how many more brilliant minds must remain invisible before the world finally learns to see them? What do you think about Naomi's journey, from being invisible to becoming the voice that saved everything? Have you ever seen someone underestimated because of who they are, not what they can do? If this story moved you, Make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because voices like Naomi's deserve to be heard.